What would you do if the woman you were about to marry drugged your daughter, then tried to steal her away, using your own name to do it? Julian Carter froze mid-reach. The medical chart hung limply between his fingers, but his mind had already gone still. She gave the nurse money, Daddy. I saw it with my own eyes. The whisper was so soft, it barely stirred the hospital air, but it sliced through the sterile silence like a scalpel. Julian turned slowly toward the bed. 7-year-old Jasmine Carter sat up under a fleece blanket dotted with butterflies. Her big brown eyes, so much like her late mother's, were locked on him, steady and unblinking. He crouched down beside her, brushing a loose curl from her forehead. "Sweetheart, what did you just say?" "Miss Evelyn gave Nurse Sharon some money." "In an envelope." Jasmine looked down, then back up at him. "Then Nurse Sharon came in and said I had a fever. But I didn't. I was awake the whole time." Julian's pulse jumped. St. Helena Medical Tower wasn't just any hospital. It was his hospital. And yet here was his daughter, calmly telling him someone had falsified her medical chart inside his own building. He tried to keep his voice calm. "When did this happen?" "2 nights ago. Around midnight. Evelyn gave her the envelope, and then Nurse Sharon brought me some pills." Jasmine's fingers curled tighter around the edge of her blanket. "She said they were vitamins, but every time I took them my head hurt. I felt dizzy." Julian clenched his jaw. Evelyn Blake, his girlfriend. His partner. The woman who had stood by him through grief, helped him rebuild after his wife's death. She had taken a leave of absence from her career to help care for Jasmine. She had been loyal, steady, or so he thought. "She gave you pills?" Julian asked, his voice low. Jasmine nodded. "She said they'd help me sleep." "But they didn't. They made everything feel weird. Like my head was floating. Did you tell anyone?" "I tried, but nobody listened." "Nurse Sharon just told me to rest and said it was part of my treatment. But I don't feel sick, Daddy. Not until I take those pills." Julian exhaled through his nose, slowly. Just days ago, Evelyn had approached him gently, brushing his hand with hers, suggesting he sign a temporary medical power of attorney, just in case, she'd said. "You've been through too much. If anything happens again, someone needs to be ready to act for Jasmine." At the time, it had sounded like compassion. Now it sounded like a setup. Jasmine's voice tugged him back. "I drew what I saw," she said. "It's in my sketchbook." Julian opened it with trembling fingers, flipping past childish drawings of sunshine and flowers, until he found it. A bird's-eye view of her hospital room, crudely but clearly drawn. 2 stick figures labeled V and Nurse. A little envelope with $signs between them. In the corner, Jasmine lay in bed with one eye open, watching. A chill ran down his spine. "Why are you telling me this now?" Jasmine hesitated. "Because if I don't say anything, something worse might happen. I don't want to take those pills anymore, and I don't want to go to that other hospital Evelyn keeps talking about." Julian's heart pounded. Just a few days ago, Evelyn had casually brought up the idea of transferring Jasmine to a specialist pediatric center in Oregon. At the time, it had sounded concerned. Responsible. Now it felt like a piece of a much larger plan. He touched Jasmine's cheek. "Sweetheart, do you trust me?" She nodded without hesitation. "Then rest, okay? I'm going to take care of this." As he stood, Julian looked out at the city skyline beyond the window, Chicago's lights flickering to life one by one. But all he could think about was the shadow creeping inside his own building, inside his own life. Behind him, Jasmine curled back under the blanket, her eyes never leaving him. Her last words whispered through his mind. Sometimes the most dangerous lies aren't loud. They come with a smile and silence. That night, Julian didn't sleep. After Jasmine drifted off, he stepped quietly from the room, walking the sterile corridors of St. Helena with a fire building in his chest. By the time he reached the stairwell, he already knew where he was headed. The security office. He had built this hospital to heal, but now he would use every inch of it to uncover the truth. Julian Carter didn't take the elevator. Every instinct in him told him to move fast, quiet, deliberate. His footsteps echoed sharply on the stairwell as he descended to the sublevel. The hum of fluorescent lights overhead felt colder than usual. His mind buzzed louder than the hospital's machines. He had built St. Helena Medical Tower to be a sanctuary, a legacy, a place of trust. But now, his 7-year-old daughter had whispered a truth that cracked the foundation beneath it all. And if she was right, when she was right, someone inside this building was hurting her. Lying to him, using their proximity not to help but to harm. He arrived at the staff-only hallway and scanned his badge. The light flashed green. Inside, the small security office sat tucked between records and HR. Dim, quiet, and largely forgotten by the upper staff. But tonight, it held the one thing Julian needed most. Proof. Mr. Carter? Earl, the night security supervisor, looked up, startled. His beard was grey, his eyes sharp despite nearly 2 decades on the job. Everything okay, sir? Julian closed the door behind him. I need access to surveillance footage. Pediatric wing, room 521. Earl blinked. That's Jasmine's room, right? Julian didn't answer. He was already pulling out a chair and leaning toward the monitor. Specifically the past 7 nights, between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. Earl nodded, his fingers flying over the keyboard. The system whirred as it loaded. Julian watched the screen intently. At first, it was routine nurses passing by, a janitor with a mop cart, the distant sound of soft-soled shoes on polished linoleum. Then, 11:46 p.m. Evelyn appeared. Julian's jaw tightened. She wore a grey coat over a blouse, envelope in one hand, posture purposeful. She didn't linger, walked directly to the nurse's station. There, she found Nurse Sharon Brooks, the night shift nurse assigned to Jasmine. The footage had no sound, but their body language was unmistakable. Evelyn leaned in, gestured with the envelope. Sharon glanced down the hallway, visibly hesitant. Then, she took it, tucked the envelope into her uniform pocket. Earl paused the feed. Want to see what happened next? Julian didn't speak, just nodded once. The next clip showed Nurse Sharon entering Jasmine's room just after midnight. She held a small paper cup likely containing pills. She didn't check Jasmine's vitals. Didn't say anything. She simply handed over the cup. Jasmine swallowed. Sharon opened the chart, wrote something, then she left. Less than 3 minutes. Back at the terminal, she typed steadily for over 10 minutes. The timestamp matched the official report Fever 101. 8. Elevated heart rate, symptoms of distress. All lies. Julian leaned back, hands pressed to his face. He had believed Jasmine, but seeing it play out with such cold calculation drove the guilt like a nail into his chest. Earl, he said quietly, make a copy of this footage. Secure it. Don't speak a word about it. You got it, boss. Julian stood, his shoulders squared now, jaw clenched. The pain wasn't just personal anymore. It was institutional. Jasmine might not be the only child at risk if someone like Evelyn could manipulate protocols so easily. He strode to the pediatric wing, his steps faster now, heart hammering. At the main desk, a young nurse named Kelsey was reviewing charts. Excuse me, Julian said in a low voice. Where's Nurse Thelma? Kelsey looked up, confused. Miss Thelma. She got reassigned to cardiology last week. Something about performance concerns? Julian frowned. Miss Thelma had been Jasmine's favorite nurse. Gentle, attentive, highly experienced. Now she was gone? That was an administrative order? Yes, sir, from upstairs. We all thought it was strange. Julian thanked her and walked off, his hands curled into fists. Of course they moved her. If someone wanted to hide changes in Jasmine's behavior, if they wanted to manufacture symptoms, then removing the most observant nurse made perfect sense. Back in his office, Julian sat at his desk and opened Jasmine's digital chart. He read everything twice. Miss Thelma's last note, dated 7 days ago, was clear and measured. Patient alert and responsive, no signs of fever or lethargy, appetite normal. And the next day, Sharon's notes began. Patient restless, reports stomach discomfort, temperature elevated. Emotional distress observed. A sudden, drastic shift. Julian moved to the medication log. A new entry. Mild pediatric sedative. Requested by Sharon Brooks. Approved, not by a doctor, but by temporary guardian authorization. The name listed, Evelyn Blake. Julian's hands trembled. Evelyn didn't have legal authority. She had convinced him to consider giving it. But he had never signed anything. He checked the timestamp. No signature. No authentication. Just an internal override marked, pending upload. Authorized manually. Fraud. His phone buzzed. A text from Evelyn. Just checking in, Jasmine seemed off tonight. Maybe we should move up the Oregon transfer. Let's talk tomorrow. Julian stared at the message, his thumb hovering over reply. But he didn't type. Instead, he sat in silence, watching the Chicago skyline blink beyond the window. This wasn't miscommunication. It was a plan. Evelyn was orchestrating something cold, calculated, and if he hadn't listened to Jasmine's whisper, it would have worked. He looked down at her drawing again. 2 stick figures, a folded envelope, a small girl watching with one eye open. That child had seen everything the adults had missed. Julian stood. If Evelyn thought she could use proximity, trust, and power to bend reality, she had miscalculated. Because now, she had awakened the one person who would never stop fighting. Jasmine's father. The next morning, Julian Carter arrived at St. Helena Medical Tower before the sun crested over the skyline. He hadn't slept. He didn't need to. What he needed now was clarity. He moved like a man on a mission, silent, deliberate, cold-blooded in focus. A father first, a CEO second. And this morning, both roles would collide. At the front desk, he gave a polite nod, envelope in hand, and stepped into the elevator alone. The sealed document inside bore the official seal of Grant Care, an immediate order authorizing a full third-party review of Jasmine's case. No more internal staff, no more room for manipulation. Dr. Amanda Fields, an independent pediatric specialist known for her integrity, had been flown in from New York. She was waiting in his office, unaware of the full storm brewing. Veronica didn't know she was coming. And that was the point. As the elevator rose, Julian reviewed the timeline in his head again. Jasmine's symptoms began shortly after Nurse Thelma was reassigned. Evelyn suggested a transfer to Oregon just days after pushing for medical guardianship. Medication logs showed unapproved prescriptions. And now, Jasmine had told him Evelyn was still trying to move her. A few days ago, it was concern. Now it reeked of strategy. The elevator chimed. He stepped out, heading straight for Jasmine's room. But what he saw stopped him cold. The bed was empty, sheets pulled back, the pillow still indented. Her sketchbook was gone. The little pink stuffed bunny always nestled in her arms, nowhere to be seen. Julian spun around and marched straight to the nurse's station. "Where's Jasmine Carter?" he demanded. The nurse on duty blinked. She was new, young, nervous. She was transferred this morning, sir, around 6 a.m. Julian's voice dropped to a dangerous low. Transferred? By whose authorization? The nurse typed furiously into the terminal. It says here, the request came from her medical power of attorney, a Miss Evelyn Blake. Destination, Skylark Medical Center in Oregon. Emergency pediatric neurological consult. Julian's stomach turned. That's not possible. I never signed a medical power of attorney. The nurse paled. There's a digital copy in the system. Time-stamped last night, 32 p.m. Julian's breath caught. He had been with Jasmine at that exact moment, reading her a bedtime story. The signature was forged. He took a step back, his voice barely more than a growl. Lock down the exits, notify hospital security. No one had the authority to move my daughter. The nurse picked up the phone, trembling. Julian was already calling Earl, the head of security. Where was our posted guard last night outside room 521? A pause. Sir, I was told you cancelled that request. By who? A call came in around 4 a.m. Using your credentials, they said you'd authorized it personally. The guard was reassigned to the ER. Julian's throat went dry. She hadn't just forged his signature, she'd used his voice. Recordings, voice memos, they'd had long conversations. Evelyn had been in his life every day for over a year. She'd had plenty of access, and now she'd used it to abduct his daughter under the guise of medical care. Earl, he barked. Pull footage from every hallway between 4 a.m. and 6 a.m. Mum, get me timestamps, exit logs. Transport manifests, everything, now. He hung up. Next, he dialed the one person who could help him cut through red tape faster than any board member or executive agent Whitaker, a seasoned investigator with the Seattle division who had once assisted Julian during an internal embezzlement case. The phone rang twice. Whitaker. It's Julian Carter. My daughter has been abducted under false medical pretenses. I believe her medical records were falsified. Her transfer was illegal. Do you have proof? I'm gathering it now. But she's already en route to Skylark Medical Center in Oregon. Send me the facility's info. I'll coordinate with Oregon State Police. But do not make direct contact until I secure a warrant. Julian ended the call. His hands were steady, but inside, his heart was a furnace. Evelyn had planned this. The pills, the paperwork, the quiet pressure to give up guardianship, the fake diagnosis. It hadn't been improvisation. It had been choreographed, step by step, a perfectly crafted illusion. He stormed back into his office just as Logan Pierce, his former director of system security, entered holding a slim USB drive. I found what you were looking for, Logan said, breath short. And Julian, you're not going to like it. Julian inserted the drive and opened the files. Buried deep in the server, under layers of backup logs and archived metadata, was a trail, one no one had expected him to find. Manual overrides, dozens of them. Each time Jasmine's vitals were updated, it coincided with Nurse Sharon's shifts. Heart rate, blood pressure, temperature all inflated, even when Miss Thelma had previously logged her as healthy. Julian moved to the drug inventory. A strange name appeared. Zetrophanyl D. Off-label, not approved for pediatric use. What the hell is this? Julian asked. It's a trauma drug, Logan replied grimly. Still in testing, not cleared for children. Then it had been logged under pediatric supplement batch codes, making it nearly invisible in the standard audit. She hadn't just lied. She had drugged a child to simulate symptoms that didn't exist. Julian looked up at Logan, rage boiling behind his eyes. She moved Jasmine before we could complete the new evaluation. She knew we were closing in. Logan nodded, and she thinks she covered her tracks. Then she's wrong. Julian stood, fists clenched. This wasn't just about stopping Evelyn now. This was about exposing her and making sure no child, not one, would ever be used like this again. Julian Carter's car tore through the early morning streets of Chicago, tires hissing against the wet asphalt. The city was waking up, but inside his chest, a war had already begun. He wasn't just a father chasing a criminal. He was chasing the woman who had sat across his dinner table. held his hand at funerals, whispered lullabies to his daughter, and now that same woman, Evelyn Blake, had drugged Jasmine, faked medical records, and stolen her away under forged documents. But not for long. His phone buzzed. Agent Whitaker. We've located the transport. Private airfield just outside Portland. Oregon State Police are on site. They're holding the plane. Jasmine is safe. Julian's heart lurched, relief and fury twisted together. And Evelyn? Slipped away before the plane was grounded. We've issued an alert. She won't get far. Julian's knuckles tightened on the steering wheel. Not far was still too far. 2 hours later, he stood outside a modest lakefront cabin in Oregon of Grant Care's emergency recovery homes, far removed from press, noise, and risk. The nurse assigned to Jasmine greeted him at the door. She's in the back room, still sleeping, no sedatives. Just rest. Julian nodded, eyes heavy. He stepped softly down the hallway. There she was, curled under a navy blanket, Detroit Tiger's hoodie bunched at her shoulders, cheek pressed to a pillow still damp with the remnants of dried tears. Her small hand clutched the pink bunny tighter than ever. He crouched beside the bed, just watching her breathe. "Daddy's here now," he whispered. Her eyelids fluttered open, and the moment their eyes met, something broke, softly, quietly like a crack in old porcelain. "Am I still in trouble?" she asked. "No, sweetheart," Julian said, his throat tight. "You're safe. You're not in trouble." She nodded slowly. She said I had to leave because I wasn't normal." Julian's chest constricted. "You're perfect. You've always been perfect." "She just wanted to hurt me and used you to do it." Jasmine rolled over and reached beneath the pillow. She pulled out a folded sheet of paper. "I found this in her purse the night she gave the envelope to the nurse." Julian opened it. It wasn't a receipt. It wasn't a note. It was a letter of intent typed, dated 2 weeks prior. "Upon transfer, patient Jasmine Carter will be admitted under Guardian Blake's authority. The institution will receive $975,000 in staged release from the Phoenix Evergreen Trust. Compliance with sedation protocol and limited visitor policy is expected. Breach voids payment. Signed, E. Blake." Julian's fingers trembled. This wasn't just manipulation, this was monetized cruelty. "Why didn't you show this to the nurse?" he asked. Jasmine looked down at the floor. "I didn't think anyone would believe me. Grown-ups always believe the ones with shiny smiles and nice clothes." Julian wrapped his arms around her. "You did more than anyone. You told the truth. And now the truth is going to change everything." That afternoon, back in Seattle, Julian met with Margaret Green, his personal legal counsel. Rain tapped against the floor-to-ceiling windows as she laid out documents on the table. "We have everything we need," she said. "The forged authorization, the prescription abuse. And now the letter. I've already contacted the Attorney General's office." Julian leaned back in his chair. "How soon can we move?" "Immediately, but you should know. Evelyn won't go down quietly. She'll claim stress, grief, emotional trauma. Maybe even love." Julian gave a hollow laugh. "Let her." Margaret hesitated, then added, "There's one more thing. We traced the Phoenix Evergreen Trust, the fund used to promise Skylark payment." Julian looked up. "It's not Evelyn's money, is it?" "No, it was set up years ago under your name. A fund meant to help families with unlisted medical expenses. It was buried in your Global Hope Initiative paperwork." Julian stood up, pacing. She had used his own charity, his name, to launder her scheme. She'd been planning this since before Jasmine got sick. "Then we calculate backward," he said. That night, Julian returned to the safe house. Jasmine was sitting at the table, coloring quietly. The TV was off. The bunny sat beside her, ears flopped forward. She looked up as he walked in. "Did you catch the bad guys?" "Not yet. Julian smiled. But we're getting closer. Her expression turned serious. If they come here, will you be here too? Julian crouched beside her. I'll be here before they ever get close. She wrapped her arms around his neck and held on like she'd never let go. And in that moment, Julian understood. Evelyn's greatest mistake wasn't underestimating his love. It was underestimating Jasmine's courage, and that was a battle she had already lost. The following morning, Julian Carter stood in his corner office, staring out at the Seattle skyline. The city looked peaceful, but beneath that calm, a storm was coming. He turned from the window and sat at his desk, sliding Jasmine's drawing beside a folder marked Private. Inside, copies of forged records, the letter Jasmine found, surveillance screenshots, and the medication logs that no one had been meant to see. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was proof. He picked up his phone and tapped a number he hadn't dialed in a long time. After 2 rings, a tired voice answered. Gonzalez. Miss Thelma, Julian said, his voice softer than usual. It's Julian Carter. There was a pause. Sir, is Jasmine okay? She misses you, he said. So do I. Miss Thelma sighed on the other end. They said I was too close to the patient. That I'd formed an emotional bias. But Jasmine wasn't sick, Mr. Carter. She was grieving. She didn't need medication. She needed stability. Julian's hand gripped the armrest of his chair. Did you ever question the pills she was given? I did. Quietly. I flagged it. The next day, I was reassigned. Julian nodded to himself. That confirmed it. The removal of Thelma hadn't been about policy. It had been intentional. I need your help, he said. Meet me today, quietly. Bring your original notes, anything that wasn't uploaded to the system. I still have everything, she replied without hesitation. I'll be there. When the call ended, Julian rose from his chair. If they were going to take down Evelyn Blake, he needed more than moral clarity. He needed technical proof, a forensic trail of what had been altered, when, and by whom. He knew exactly who could get it. Julian called Logan Pierce. A former director of system security for Grant Care, Logan had designed the original medical record system before retiring. He was obsessive about 2 things, encryption and ethics. Within the hour, they met at the Grant Care Cafe, seated in a private booth tucked away from curious eyes. Julian laid out the situation slowly, carefully. The forged signature, the prescription tampering, the hidden access logs. Logan listened without speaking, nodding only when necessary. Then Julian slid a USB drive across the table. Start here. I need to know what was changed. And who did it? Logan picked it up, eyes scanning the label. Give me 12 hours. Make it 6, Logan smirked. You never did change. By mid-afternoon, Logan returned. No smile this time, just a grim, quiet determination. It's worse than you thought. Julian sat forward. Show me. Logan opened his laptop. These logs were manually scrubbed. Someone went in and deleted auto-backup files, adjusted timestamps, and falsified multiple patient flags. He paused, clicking to the next screen. But they forgot about a buried redundancy protocol I installed years ago. A failsafe no one else even knows exists. There it was, a complete digital trail. Over the span of 3 weeks, Jasmine's vitals had been intentionally manipulated, numbers inflated, symptoms inserted, comments changed. Each suspicious update occurred during Nurse Sharon Brooks's shifts, and behind every override was Evelyn's internal login code. Julian leaned back, cold fury settling in his bones. She created the illness, fabricated the justification, and used it to force a transfer that gave her control. Oh, exactly, Logan confirmed, and that's not all. He slid a printout across the table. Handwritten notes. Pulled from a shared cloud folder Evelyn had failed to properly secure. The header read, Transfer Protocol, JC. Julian scanned the page. Once he signs POA fast-track transfer, Skylark bills full 6-month protocol. Insurance confirmed. Target authorization, $800K $1. 2M via Jasmine Carter Trust. Guardianship clause active. Requires ER diagnosis plus psych escalation. Julian whispered, stunned. She turned my daughter into a diagnosis, a revenue stream. And used your own name to do it, Logan added. The trust you set up for her. Julian stood. His fists clenched. His voice was low and final. Not anymore. Later that evening, Julian returned to the safe house. Jasmine sat on the floor in her hoodie, sketching a tree with a tire swing beneath its branches. Sunlight beamed from the corner of the page. No bunnies, no pills, no shadows. She looked up. Did you talk to Miss Thelma? I did, Julian said. She's going to help us. Her eyes lit up, then dimmed. Veronica came back earlier. When you were gone. Julian froze. What? She said, Doctor. Lynn wants me to go to a new hospital, somewhere to check my brain better. Julian sat beside her, heart pounding. Did she say where? Skylark, in Oregon. Julian nodded slowly. He knew Skylark well. Discreet, expensive. Designed for long-term pediatric treatment and often used in custody battles. If Evelyn succeeded in transferring Jasmine there, she would have full, private control. No oversight. No interference. And once admitted, Jasmine could be medicated indefinitely. He looked into his daughter's eyes. I'm not going anywhere, right? She asked. Julian took her hand. Not without me. And not without the truth coming out. She smiled faintly. Good. I like Miss Thelma better anyway. Julian laughed softly, but inside he was already preparing. Because he knew Evelyn. She was escalating, speeding up the timeline. And if she was making her final move, then so was he. He reached into his coat and pulled out the appointment order for Dr. Amanda Fields, the independent pediatric specialist set to arrive the next morning. No one had told Evelyn. Julian intended to keep it that way. Let her be surprised. Let her realize too late that power games don't work when the truth is louder than the lie. The courtroom was silent. Not quiet silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy in the air, as if the very walls are holding their breath. Julian Carter sat at the front bench, hands clasped tightly in his lap. His suit was pressed, his jaw was set, but his eyes followed only one person. Jasmine. His daughter stood at the center of the courtroom, just a few feet away from the witness chair. She looked small, impossibly small, against the towering ceiling and polished oak furniture. But her presence filled the room. In her hand, she held her bunny threadbare, pink, with one ear flopped over and a folded piece of paper. Her statement. Judge Helen Blake leaned forward gently. Are you ready, Miss Carter? Jasmine nodded once. The prosecutor gave her a reassuring smile. Jasmine, can you tell us why you're here today? The little girl unfolded her paper carefully. Her voice, when it came, was quiet but clear. I'm here. Because someone lied. A few heads turned. Pens paused mid-sentence. They said I was sick, that something was wrong with my brain, that I needed pills to sleep. But I wasn't sick. I was just sad and scared. And I missed my mum. A pause. Even the judge blinked. The pills didn't help me sleep. They made me feel fuzzy, floaty. Like my head was full of bees. A sharp intake of breath came from somewhere in the gallery. I told the nurse, but she said it was part of the treatment. I told grown-ups, but they didn't listen. And so, I drew pictures, because I thought maybe someone would finally see. Julian felt something catch in his throat. Across the room, Evelyn Blake sat rigid in her chair, lips drawn tight. She didn't blink. Jasmine continued, her voice steady. I saw her give money to the nurse. I saw her whisper things. And then I got sicker, but only when she said I was. I wasn't really sick. She made me look sick, so she could take me away. The defense attorney stood. Objection, Your Honor. This is emotionally manipulative testimony from a minor. Judge Blake didn't flinch. Overruled. Let her speak. Jasmine glanced at Evelyn for the first time. You lied to everyone, but worst of all, you lied to me. You smiled at me. You told me I'd get better. But I wasn't even broken. The room was stone still. And then, with one final breath, she said, Truth doesn't have to be loud to be strong. Sometimes it just needs to be believed. She stepped down without waiting to be excused, walking straight toward Julian. He bent to meet her. And as she whispered, I'm okay now, into his shoulder, he realized she wasn't just testifying, she was healing. The prosecutor moved swiftly after Jasmine's testimony. First came Nurse Thelma, with her handwritten notes, showing the timeline before the falsified symptoms began. Then Logan Pierce, the former director of system security, who laid out a digital map of what had been altered and when. And finally, Grace Howard, the nurse who had taken hush money, then returned with guilt. She stood in front of the court, shaking. I gave Jasmine pills I didn't understand. I typed numbers I didn't verify. I was told it was protocol, but it wasn't, it was fraud. And I'm sorry. Her voice broke. I stayed quiet. But she didn't. She's braver than any of us. Then came Evelyn Blake. She took the stand with poise, dressed in a charcoal grey suit, her expression perfectly composed. I was concerned for Jasmine, she said. She was exhibiting signs of emotional instability. Her father was grieving. I simply wanted what was best for the child. You drugged her, the prosecutor countered, with unauthorized medication. They were supplements, Evelyn snapped. Mild, monitored. You forged a signature to gain medical power of attorney. Because Julian wouldn't act. Someone had to. And then the moment the entire courtroom shifted. You told Skylark Medical Center that Jasmine's treatment would unlock $975,000 from her trust. And you sent this. The prosecutor held up the letter Jasmine had found. Evelyn's face faltered just for a moment, but it was enough. The judge saw it. Everyone did. This wasn't about care, the prosecutor said, voice like a blade. This was about control. And money. And the only person who had the strength to stop you was a little girl you never thought anyone would believe. And the jury deliberated for just under 3 hours. They returned with guilty on all counts: medical fraud, child endangerment, obstruction, and attempted custodial interference. When the judge read the sentence and years without parole, Julian didn't smile. He didn't cheer. He simply turned to his daughter and saw her breathing steady for the first time in weeks. Later that night, in the quiet of their home, Jasmine curled up on the couch beside him. She sipped warm tea. Her bunny was tucked under one arm. The news played in the background clips of the trial, headlines flashing, "Little girl exposes medical fraud in billionaire scandal." Do you think she's gone now? Jasmine asked softly. She can't hurt you anymore, Julian said. She nodded. Do you think people will believe other kids now? Julian looked at her. They will. Because you showed them how. She smiled. This time it wasn't a tired smile. It wasn't forced. It reached her eyes. Then it was worth it. 2 days after the verdict, the headlines were everywhere. CEO's ex-fiancée sentenced in shocking child endangerment case. Jasmine Carter, the little girl who spoke the truth. Trust betrayed. $1, $2 million scheme foiled by a 7-year-old. Screens in airports, cafes, even elevators flashed Evelyn Blake's mugshot beside grainy photos of Julian Carter walking hand in hand with Jasmine out of the courthouse. But Julian didn't care about the noise. He had only one priority now: healing. At their quiet new home outside Bainbridge Island, Jasmine sat at the kitchen table, Bunny in her lap, a plate of blueberry pancakes in front of her. She wasn't watching cartoons. She was humming, softly, calmly. It was the same melody Sarah, her mother, used to hum in the kitchen. Julian hadn't heard it in years. It made something shift inside him. "I saw her on TV," Jasmine said suddenly, not looking up. "She didn't cry." Julian sat down across from her.
"Some people only cry when it benefits them." She poked at a blueberry. "Do you think she'll go to jail forever?" Julian thought for a moment.
"That's not up to me, but what matters is she can't hurt you anymore." There was a long pause. Jasmine looked up. "But will she hurt someone else?" Julian didn't answer immediately, because this wasn't just about one bad woman. This was about a system that had let it happen, that had ignored warning signs, that had silenced nurses, that had almost silenced Jasmine. He reached across the table, taking her hand. "Not if we tell the truth loud enough." That afternoon, Julian sat in a boardroom he hadn't used in months. The glass walls overlooked downtown Seattle, but the atmosphere inside was different now. No suits, no sales charts, just a simple printed sign at the head of the table. The Maya Williams Foundation Board Session, Board 001. Named in part for Jasmine's mother, the newly formed nonprofit wasn't about hospital expansion or corporate prestige. It was about protection. "We're launching a fund," Julian announced, "dedicated to whistleblowers in pediatric care, nurses, doctors, even kids. Anyone who's been silenced, anyone who needs to speak up." The room went still. An older woman, silver-haired, leaned forward. "Does Jasmine know?" Julian smiled softly. "She will. Tonight." That evening, as the sun dipped into Puget Sound, Jasmine sat on the porch, wrapped in a soft flannel blanket. The breeze smelled like salt and pine. Her bunny sat in her lap. The coloring book lay closed beside her. Julian joined her, carrying a small blue folder. "There's something I want to show you." And he opened it gently. Inside was a certificate, printed on soft parchment, edged with gold leaf, bold letters at the top, the Jasmine Carter Initiative beneath it, the mission statement: protecting truth-tellers, defending children, restoring trust in care. Jasmine's lips parted. "You named it after me." "Because you were brave. And because there are other kids out there who need someone brave enough to speak up." Her voice cracked. "But I was scared the whole time." Julian wrapped an arm around her shoulder. "Courage isn't about not being scared. It's about doing the right thing, even when you are." She leaned her head against him. For the first time in months, she didn't feel like a patient, or a victim, or a headline. She just felt seen. The next morning, Jasmine stood near the front entrance of a new outreach center. It was quiet, still under construction, but the plaque was already mounted. The Jasmine Carter Center for Child Advocacy and Voice. Inside, a few volunteers were sorting books, toys, and notebooks. One of them smiled and waved. "Morning, Jasmine." She waved back shyly. Julian knelt beside her, straightening her name badge. "You ready?" She nodded. In her hand, she held a folder of handmade cards. She had drawn each one herself, bright colors, big words. "You matter. Speak loud." "It's okay to tell." She was delivering them to children at the local pediatric hospital that day, not for attention, but because she knew what it felt like to not be heard. Later that week, a national news network reached out. They wanted to feature Jasmine in a special segment, Voices That Changed Lives. Julian hesitated. He hated the spotlight, but when he brought it up to Jasmine, her response was simple. "If I tell my story, maybe another kid won't wait so long. Maybe they'll know it's okay to speak." Julian looked at her not as a child, but as something stronger, a catalyst. We'll do it on your terms, he said. No pressure, no cameras unless you want them. She nodded. Okay. On the day of filming, Jasmine wore a simple blue dress. Her bunny sat in her lap. The interviewer, a woman named Lorraine, knelt down beside her. If anything feels too hard, just squeeze my hand, Lorraine said kindly. Jasmine nodded. The lights came on, the cameras rolled, and Jasmine told her story, not as a victim, but as a witness. She spoke about the pills, the fake fevers, the way adults dismissed her. The moment she saw her dad crying in the dark and realized she had to be the strong one. Why did you finally speak up? Lorraine asked. Jasmine looked into the camera. Because I didn't want him to hurt anymore, and I didn't want to hurt either. The room went still. Even behind the glass, Julian blinked hard. All the lawyers, the reporters, the courtroom drama known of it, had moved people the way her truth just did. That night, back home, Jasmine climbed onto the couch next to him. Do you think Mom would be proud? Julian's voice caught. She'd be more than proud. She'd see herself in you. And Jasmine smiled. Not the tired kind, but the kind that said, I made it. Rain tapped gently against the windows of the newly opened Jasmine Carter Center. Inside, the lights were soft. The waiting room smelled of fresh paint, chamomile tea, and hope. Jasmine sat near the front desk, holding her sketchbook and a folder full of hand-drawn cards. She had insisted on delivering them herself. For the kids who might be scared like I was. Julian stood behind her, watching quietly. She was different now, not louder, not older. Just stronger. But as they walked toward the elevator that would take them to the children's wing, a familiar face appeared at the end of the hallway. Grace Howard, the former nurse, the one who had taken Evelyn's money and then come forward. She looked thinner, her eyes red-rimmed, her hands fidgeted nervously with the hem of her sleeve. Mr. Carter, Jasmine. Thank you for coming. Julian nodded, his tone was firm. You said you had more to tell us. Grace led them into a small family room. She didn't sit. I've already turned in the bank records, the dummy prescriptions, the emails, but I needed to say this face to face. She turned to Jasmine. You were never sick, not the way we said. Her voice cracked. I knew something was wrong. I watched you cry, saw your hands shake. And I still gave you those pills. I told myself I was protecting you, that Evelyn knew better, that I'd lose my job if I didn't, but I lied, and I'm sorry. Jasmine didn't say anything at first. She just watched her, really watched. Then she walked slowly to the couch, sat down, and said softly, but clearly, Were you scared of her? Grace blinked. Yes. Jasmine looked down at her lap. Me too. There was no anger, no bitterness. Just a quiet, heavy understanding, the kind only a child forced to grow up too soon could offer. I forgive you, Jasmine said, but please, don't stay quiet again. Grace burst into quiet tears. Julian stepped forward and placed a folder on the table. This is a legal protection order. If you're willing, you can testify anonymously in the civil hearings. We'll make sure you're safe. Grace nodded. I will. This time I won't look away. That night, Jasmine sat by the window at home, a mug of warm tea in her hands. The street outside was slick with rain. She watched it trail down the glass in long silver lines. She said she was scared, Jasmine said quietly. But I don't get it. Why do grown-ups let fear make them mean? Julian sat across from her. Because fear can be louder than kindness, if you let it. She turned to face him. Do you think people can change? He considered that. Yes, but only when they face what they've done and choose to be better. She nodded slowly. I hope she does. The next morning, Julian received a call, National Network News. They wanted to run a live segment on the Jasmine Carter initiative, primetime, full access. He was hesitant again, but when he brought it up, Jasmine didn't flinch. "If I tell my story," she said, "maybe some other kid won't have to wait like I did." Julian looked at her, pride swelling beneath the sorrow. She should have been worried about cartoons and spelling tests. Instead, she was thinking about other children. Kids she hadn't even met. "Okay," he said, "but only if it's on your terms." And she smiled. "Deal." On the day of the interview, Jasmine wore a soft yellow dress. Her hair was tied back neatly, and her bunny sat in her lap. The interviewer, Lorraine, kneeled beside her once more. "If anything feels too hard," she said gently, "just say so." "We'll stop." Jasmine nodded, and then the cameras rolled. "Why did you finally speak up?" Lorraine asked. Jasmine paused. "Because I didn't want Daddy to hurt anymore. And I didn't want to keep hurting either." The room went still. Even Lorraine wiped her eye. But as the broadcast aired that night, across thousands of households, someone else was watching too. Inside a dim hotel room on the outskirts of Napa Valley, a figure sat hunched near a glowing TV. Evelyn Blake. She wasn't in prison, not yet. She had slipped away before the final arrest disappeared into a web of false names and backdoor cash. Her phone buzzed, a burner, no movement from the foundation yet. Lawyers still scrambling, but the girl's getting attention. She tossed the phone aside, jaw tightening. She hadn't expected Jasmine to speak so clearly, or to gain this much support. Control was slipping. But Evelyn wasn't done, not yet. She opened her laptop, typed a name. A shell company tied to an offshore trust, the only one Julian hadn't shut down yet. Inside it, leverage. Money, documents, and secrets. She would use them all, because Evelyn didn't believe in justice, she believed in winning. Back in Seattle, Julian watched the end of the interview beside Jasmine. "Do you think anyone else is going to try what she did?" she asked. He sighed. "Maybe, but you made it a whole lot harder for them." She nodded. "Then it was worth it." In the quiet that followed, Julian realized something. This wasn't over. Not yet, but this time they weren't alone, and Evelyn Blake. She had already underestimated the wrong little girl once. She wouldn't survive doing it again. The air in Napa Valley was unusually crisp for early fall. Golden sunlight spilled over the vineyards, casting long shadows between the vines. But in a tucked-away villa near the hills, the atmosphere was anything but tranquil. Inside, Evelyn Blake stood at the vanity, brushing her hair with mechanical calm. She had been on the run for weeks, evading warrants, ducking headlines, slipping through cracks she herself had helped create. But even now, cornered, alone, and exposed, she still believed she was smarter than all of them. She had one move left, and she was about to play it. Meanwhile, back in Seattle, Julian Carter stood before a panel of lawyers and federal investigators in a private boardroom. On the table in front of them, a manila envelope marked "Confidential, Re-Evergreen Trust." "What you're holding," Julian began, "is the final piece Evelyn didn't want us to find." He nodded toward Logan Pierce, who opened his laptop and pulled up a set of encrypted financial records. "These transfers," Logan said, "go back 2 years. Shell companies, off-the-books consulting, all tied to a trust Evelyn reactivated 3 weeks ago. This is where she's been hiding the money." Julian folded his arms. "It's also how she's trying to buy her way out. She's already attempted to retain a legal team out of Argentina, international custody appeal, based on fabricated documents claiming Jasmine is under mental observation." A murmur rippled through the room. "She's escalating again," said Margaret Green, Julian's lead counsel. "We have to move first." That night, Julian returned home. Jasmine was curled up on the couch, flipping through a book of animals. She looked up as he entered.
Did they find her? Julian shook his head. Not yet, but they will.
She hesitated, then whispered, I had a dream last night that she came back. What happened? She tried to take me again, but this time, you didn't believe her.
Julian's heart twisted. He sat down beside her and pulled her close. That's not just a dream. That's a promise. The next morning, Agent Whitaker called. We found her.
Napa Valley. Rented a villa under a false name. Surveillance confirms she's alone. Is she armed? Not that we know of, but she's definitely preparing something. Julian's voice was calm.
Then I'll be there. Julian, this is law enforcement territory. She tried to take my daughter, he said coldly.
This is my territory. By sundown, Julian arrived in California. He didn't bring security.
Just resolve. Whitaker met him near the gate of the property. We've surrounded the rear.
Quiet approach. You go in with me, we take her together. Julian nodded. The door creaked open under Whitaker's knock. Inside, the scent of lavender mixed with stale wine. Evelyn stood at the end of the hallway, dressed in pale silk, holding a glass of water like it was champagne. She didn't flinch, didn't run. She smiled. Well, she said, I suppose this day had to come. Whitaker stepped forward. Evelyn Blake, you're under arrest. Let me guess, she interrupted. Fraud, conspiracy, attempted custodial interference. She set the glass down. Save the speech, I've memorized it. Julian's voice cut through the tension. You gave my daughter drugs she didn't need. You told a nurse to make her look broken so you could steal from her. That's not strategy. That's monstrous. Evelyn finally turned to face him. And this time her voice wasn't polished. It was bitter. You gave everything to that child. Your name, your legacy, you let her replace what you lost. You mean her mother, Julian said. The woman I actually loved. No, she snapped. I mean me. There it was. The crack in the mask. The thing no one had said aloud. Evelyn hadn't just wanted control, she'd wanted revenge. And Jasmine had been her target. Whitaker stepped forward, cuffs in hand. It's over, Evelyn. She didn't resist, but as the cold metal clicked into place, she whispered, You'll thank me one day, when she turns on you too. Julian looked at her not with anger, not even pity, but with finality. She already had every reason to turn on me, and she didn't. That's the difference between her and you. Benant, back in Seattle, the news broke instantly. Evelyn Blake, captured in California. Attempted custody fraud, foiled in final hour. Jasmine Carter safe. Foundation continues work. But Julian refused interviews. He didn't need cameras to validate what mattered. That night, he returned to their quiet home. Jasmine sat at the breakfast table, coloring a card. For Nurse Thelma, she explained. She's scared about going to court. Julian sat beside her. You don't have to do all this. And she looked up. Yes, I do, because people still don't believe little kids. But if they get a card from someone little, maybe they'll try. Julian smiled. You're changing things, you know that? Good, she said, brushing a crayon stroke. Because I don't want anyone else to be that scared. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees. The worst was over. But Jasmine had learned something most kids never should, that sometimes monsters don't hide under beds. They sit across dinner tables. And sometimes justice isn't a gavel, it's a whisper that refuses to stay quiet. The air smelled like spring, fresh soil, blooming hydrangeas, a hint of ocean breeze rolling in from Puget Sound. Julian Carter stood on the porch of their new home, watching as Jasmine planted tiny wildflower seeds along the front path. Each one carefully placed, each one a promise that what had been broken could bloom again. It had been 6 months since Evelyn Blake was taken into custody, 6 months since the courtroom silence shattered by Jasmine's voice, and in those months, the world had watched. But more importantly, Jasmine had lived, not as a case study, not as a survivor, but as a little girl, finally free to be one. Inside, the house was alive with sound. Laughter from the kitchen. Pots clinking, music drifting softly from the record player. Miss Thelma, now officially retired from nursing, was teaching Jasmine how to make her favorite sweet potato pie.
Now don't overmix it, baby. Let the flavors breathe. You want the pie to sing, not scream.
Jasmine giggled. I don't want a screaming pie, that's for sure. Julian leaned against the doorway, smiling. The old nurse gave him a wink. She's got hands like her mama. Light. Careful, honest. That word honest settled gently in the air. No one had to say what it meant. They had all lived it. Later that afternoon, Julian and Jasmine walked the path down to the water. Her bunny was still in her hand-faded floppy, but now whole again, thanks to Thelma's expert stitching. Dad? Jasmine asked, skipping a rock across the surface. Yeah? Do you think I'll always be known as that girl from the trial? Julian considered his answer carefully. Only if you let that be your whole story. She looked up. But I don't want that to be my story. Then it won't be. She paused. What should it be then? He turned to her. How about the girl who told the truth, helped people heal, and then built something better? She smiled slowly. I like that one. The next morning, they stood in front of the new wing of the Jasmine Carter Center. Balloons danced in the breeze, families gathered, reporters stayed respectfully back. A local senator gave a short speech, but when Jasmine stepped up to the podium holding no paper, no script, the crowd leaned in. Hi. I'm Jasmine, and I'm not just someone something bad happened to. I'm someone who knows what it's like to be afraid. To not be believed. But I also know what it means when someone listens. So this new wing is for that. For listening. For helping kids find words when grown-ups won't hear them. She pointed to the sign behind her. The room for voice. Because the truth shouldn't have to shout to matter. The crowd stood. Some cried. Julian stood just off stage, hands clasped tight, the same way he had when she first took the witness stand. But this time, he wasn't bracing for pain. He was witnessing power. That night, back at home, Jasmine placed a small photo on the nightstand beside her bed. It was one of her mother. Sarah's eyes sparkled in the picture, her smile caught in mid-laughter. Jasmine traced the edges of the frame. She would have liked Thelma, she whispered. Julian walked in carrying a blanket. She would have loved Thelma, and you. Jasmine pulled the covers up, settling into the warmth. Dad? Yeah? When people ask me about everything, what should I say? He thought about that, then sat on the edge of her bed. You say, I went through something hard, but I didn't stay there. You say, my story didn't end where it got dark. She nodded slowly. Okay, that's what I'll say. The next morning, a letter arrived. It wasn't from a donor or a lawyer. It was from a 10-year-old girl in Iowa. Written in pencil, slanted handwriting. Dear Jasmine, I saw your story. People didn't believe me either, but now I think maybe I can try again. Thank you for being brave. I want to be brave too. Jasmine folded the letter carefully. She's the first one, she whispered. Julian smiled. The first of many. Later that week, they added a new plaque to the center's main hallway. It read, "This space was built not just in memory of the truth, but in celebration of those who dared to tell it." Beneath it, 2 names, Julian Carter, founder, Jasmine Carter, voice. On Sunday, they sat on the porch again, just like that spring day when the flowers went in. But this time, the wildflowers were blooming, vivid, bold, untamed. just like the little girl who planted them. Jasmine leaned against her father's side. "What do we do now?" He smiled. "Now? We live." She nodded, then reached down and picked a flower. Not to keep, but to give, because her story wasn't just about what was taken from her. It was about what she chose to give back, and that was her beginning. Life doesn't always unfold the way we plan. Sometimes it takes a child's whisper to uncover the truth we've been too busy or too afraid to see. This story reminds us that courage isn't found in grand gestures, but in the quiet decision to stand up for what's right, even when no one is watching. For older Americans who've lived through seasons of loss, betrayal, and resilience, Julian and Jasmine's journey is a powerful reflection of what truly matters: truth, love, and second chances. We are never too old to listen with our hearts, and we're never too broken to begin again. Whether it's protecting the vulnerable, repairing fractured bonds, or choosing to forgive for the sake of peace. This story teaches us that healing is possible, not because the past can be undone, but because the future can still be rewritten. Let us never underestimate the voice of a child, the strength of a parent's love, or the quiet power of doing the right thing no matter how long it takes.